It is once again Friday in the PM, and of course this is your host for Real Time in Politics, United States Representative Danny Kenyatta Davis. People sometimes ask me what the K stands for in my name, and it really was taken from Jomo Kenyatta. The first African country that I ever visited was Kenya. And I was fortunate enough to travel to Nairobi, Kenya in 1975 and spend a month. Some of the people on that trip, one of them I met with this morning, Dr. Wayne Watson, Dr. Carol Adams, Dr. Grady Jordan, a whole bunch of people were on that trip, Dr. Don Linder, and they all are doctors and so forth now. As a matter of fact, we were in a study program. Some of us had just earned doctorate degrees. Some of us were working on doctorate degrees. Wayne had actually just earned his from Northwestern University. But we had a wonderful time, and it's always good to be with you, our viewing audience. You are watching Star Planet Television, and we want to thank Mr. W.L. Lillard for giving us the opportunity to make use of these airwaves to talk about pertinent issues that cut across all social, racial, ethnic groups, all kinds of geography, because politics to me is much more than just a matter of who gets elected to public office, or whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. It's really about the way of life that you lead. It's also about the way of life that you want to lead. It's also about what you want the world to become. I often tell people at church that my politics and my religion go hand in hand. They both speak to what I want the world to be. And of course, when I leave here, I'd like to go on up yonder also, and so I try to have a combination of these things clicking at one time. I don't want to go down there. So moving on up as opposed to moving on down. But we have in the studio with us this afternoon two gentlemen who are engaged in work that I consider to be very, very important. And I am pleased to know that there's more and more discussion taking place, more and more concern being expressed. We have in the studio Dr. Kirk Harris, who has a master's degree in public administration, a Juris Doctorate degree, and a PhD degree, which means that he's done a lot of studying in his life. And he is the senior advisor with Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities, which really means that Kirk spends a lot of time traveling throughout America talking about fatherhood and issues related to fatherhood, and what often happens to people who don't have the opportunity to experience the same level of fatherhood, guidance, and direction that some of us do. Kirk, we're delighted to have you with us, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman. And what I have to say is that it's a pleasure being here in Chicago, because usually I see you in D.C.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we also have with us Reverend Walter Jones, who is the founder and director of Fathers Who Care. Now, Reverend Jones is a creative person who is able to take situations and create activity and movement and things. He is noted for being able to make things happen and to get things done. So, Reverend Jones, we want to thank you. And he is also an associate pastor at the New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church on the west side of Chicago. where the Reverend Dr. Marshall E. Hatch, Marshall Elijah Hatch, I believe, is the senior pastor.
Yes, sir.
Well, gentlemen, we are talking about fatherhood. We have been experiencing a tremendous amount of violence in the African American community in Chicago, but not just Chicago, but in many places throughout urban America especially. The last discussion that I heard suggested that the absence of fathers in some of the instances may have been causative factors or may have had negative influence on the lives of children as they were growing up. Kirk, in your estimation, if a child grows up without serious involvement of a father in their lives, what are some of the things that they are more likely to experience than children who grow up in a two-parent home?
Right. Well, let me just say thank you, Congressman. First, let me just acknowledge all the work that you've been doing nationally as it relates to fatherhood, including your Julia Carson Act and a number of initiatives which you have been promoting over the years. So I just want to thank you for your leadership, because I think that's really important to say. And in response to your direct question, I think first of all we have to be really careful, because we know there are many influences on a child's life that impact the outcomes associated with that child. But what we can say, and what the research over the last 20 years has suggested, that there are some causal links between child outcomes, child behavior, and the absence of critical assets in the life of that child. We know that in many of our communities that there are fathers are not as engaged and as regularly present as we would like, and that has some significant influences on behavior. It has some significant influences on the context in which children feel safe. It has some significant influences on the integrity and the strength of community to respond to particular activities within that community. And to the extent that our communities are weakened because we don't have the full asset of men and fathers within the family and within the community, that has a dramatic impact on the outcomes, not only for children, but for our communities at large.
Well, let me ask you, Walter, how do you think we got to the point, where when I look at statistics, when I look at the number of single-parent homes and single-parent families, it is actually astounding, especially in African American life. And I find that the numbers are more dramatic in African American life than in a lot of other population groups. How do you think this happened? What produced it, or what caused it? How did we get to this point?
Well, Congressman, I too would like to echo what Kirk said earlier about thanking you for what you've been doing, for laying the foundation, for allowing others to stand on your shoulder, and for continuing to pioneer this fatherhood movement. It is because of you and the work that you've been doing and the work that you allowed others to do that we're now talking openly. Is politically correct now to talk about fatherhood involvement, men's health, fatherhood involvement in the lives of their children, and so on. But particularly the question you raised, how did we get to where we are with this distance or this absence of fathers in the lives of children? Well, of course, most African Americans in this day and age are not marrying. Their values are completely shot. They're not believing in something stronger than themselves.
Do you think that a person would say there's anything wrong with their values because they're not married?
Well, this is an interesting and very complex question, Congressman, because I think in one sense one could argue that there's been a larger global change in marriage rates for America as a whole, right? Now, for the African American community, that has a very specific set of issues, because when you are married, you bring together a set of assets, right? Financial assets, human assets, skill assets, a number of assets that are utilized to strengthen the family. Now, we also know that within the African American community, that marriage does not necessarily come out of something that people just wanted, that people do because they're committed, because they do it because they're committed. But there's also a piece of it which says when you get married, you're going to be better off. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that in the African American community there are a number of economic disjunctures that make men less viable in the workforce, that has dramatic implications on their marriageability.
So we don't understand how to be better off. I'm saying if a person mm-hmm. grows up with the understanding and the idea that if I get married, in all likelihood, I'm going to be better off than if I don't get married, mm-hmm. that this would drive individuals towards marriage. I
agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah. I agree with that.
Want to be better off.
I agree with that assessment you just made. I also agree with the fact, and I stated it, that there's a culture of it's a value culture. How do you feel? How were you raised in a two-parent home? Right. Do you believe that this is the way that you should live your life? Now we're still talking about the absence of fathers. So the value levels. If fathers are not actively involved in the lives of their children, that's because they don't have those values.
Well, let me tell you, when I try to engage young people, male and female, mm-hmm. in this question of the desirability of marriage, many of them express that it's not something that they've programmed into their psyche.
Wow.
That I want to get married.
Right.
Or I intend to get married. I'm looking for a mate. I mean, there used to be a time when people would say, and they'd laugh kind of jokingly, if their daughter was going to college, they'd say, well, you know, I want my daughter to find a good husband, and a good place to look is in college, because these guys probably will get an education. Right. They probably.
But that's my point, Congressman. That what we're seeing is that this disjuncture between the viability of individuals within the marital relationship. That in many instances in the African American community, the economic inequalities that are in our communities have cause people to make certain choices that aren't necessarily supporting the institution of marriage. And so if you, William Julius Wilson, in his book, in his early book, wrote about the incidence of marriage and marriageability and connected that specifically to issues related to economic disjuncture. And I think that's a piece of it. I also think that people aren't seeing the models. So the question is whether it's the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart, you know, because if you're not seeing the models because of these economic disjunctures and you're not seeing successful married relationships, then you may not know how to do that when you become of age. So I think it's a very complex problem.
But you know, there's a young senior college student mm-hmm. in the studio with us. You don't see her on camera, but I'm going to ask her: are the young women at your college, are they seeking a husband at college?
Not at my college, but I have heard of it at other Southern colleges where marriage is sought after, mostly traditional Southern colleges, but not at my college. But I do know some that, you know, they go to college to find a husband.
But not in Illinois, where you go.
No, not at Southern. Not that I know of.
But you've heard that at some of the traditional historically black colleges and universities, there is a little more of this cultural value
Yes.
structure.
Yeah.
Is that kind of,
Yeah.
that families think if their daughter is at Howard, they may find a good husband at Howard.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting.
So it sounds like she's echoing some sentiments of value, family values. And it's in the southern universities. Now, when you talked about the absence and of course, we talk about folks who are not married now. Now, 9 times out of 10 to be in poverty, be obesity, be parents too soon, be involved in crime. Right. 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, but I think that's right, that there is a diminishing of this cultural value broadly in America for marriage. And I think that's problematic because I think the research does suggest that 2-parent households with a mother and father in a traditional context and with extended family and community create better outcomes for children.
Absolutely.
And so there's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
But I also think we have to be careful that we don't suggest that all of the problem is kind of a result of a moral deficiency, because I would argue that some of a good part of the problem is a structural issue. Many of the issues that you confront in your day-to-day legislative agenda, Congressman, for example, the Second Chance Act is a great example. We know that many of the men within our communities are disproportionately impacted by incarceration, and that has tremendous impact on their ability to reintegrate with their family and their community. And these have dramatic implications for how our communities look over time. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure that as we're having these discussions about kind of the moral efficacy of marriage, that we're also making sure that we carefully and strategically infuse the discussion about the structural imperatives and inequalities that have created the problem in the African American community.
Well, let me ask our student again. Would you see yourself marrying a person who had been in prison?
Honestly, no. No, I probably wouldn't.
So it certainly wouldn't be your pursuit.
No. I would probably see myself marrying someone most likely that I met in college or in a higher learning facility like graduate school or.
But you would want to marry a person who matched your accomplishment
right.
in higher education or social status.
My friends have this conversation all the time, and we rather look for guys that have a college degree or higher. I mean, we're not gonna discriminate or be bougie or anything, but I don't know. We prefer education.
So you're keeping it 300 now, right? Right. You're telling the congressman the truth.
Yeah.
Well, but so what happens though is that many individuals don't make the connection, I would suspect, with, like I hear young women say that they have some difficulty finding a male with the same academic background that they have acquired, and they just don't see themselves going downward.
Right, and that's the challenge.
As opposed to the opportunity to go upward.
Right.
I would like to hear from the young lady that you brought in today. How does she personally feel? Does she want to be a parent one day? Do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
One day.
Do you want to marry someone who's spiritually and morally upright, or would you like to marry one of them bad boys?
No, he has to be equally yoked.
Equally yoked. So that means he has to have some spirituality in his life and some family values, right?
Right.
Now, that would be something when you probably would be interested in possibly marrying, right?
Right.
Well, I submit to you, statistically speaking, that when you marry that particular type of individual, your life would be a little bit more wholesome. You'd be less likely to be on welfare, you would, or bear children of currently being on welfare. Most women who are on welfare really don't have a relationship with a caring individual who have probably gave them that child and then stood around to take care of the child.
Yeah.
So those are some statistics we were talking about initially.
Well, I mean, I think, but let me just say that I think in many, what some of the research has suggested is that many men are connected to their families. That we say they're absent, that they are, but they are in fact tangentially connected to their families.
Non-custodial.
Non-custodial, right? Mm-hmm. And often they're providing some support, but not of the level that's necessary and that's required. And the other thing that I think we have to be careful of is that when we talk about these issues of whether a woman would be interested in marrying someone who was formerly incarcerated, remember, part of the reason why we have this disproportionate impact of African American males being incarcerated is because there's a disproportionate application of the law in ways that result in their incarceration at higher rates. Mm-hmm. All right, so it's the inequality of the application of the law, and as we know, I don't need to go into the whole thing around the war on drugs and the implications that has had on African American
people.
Right.
People are making choices.
People are making choices,
right.
and people are making choices, and in some instances, our legal institutions are creating inequalities. Even if people make bad choices, they're creating inequalities that create sanctions on some people that are far greater than on others.
I agree.
Which makes the decision whether that young lady would marry that person, right? And once they're connected to those systems, they have barriers that don't allow them to go to school, that don't allow them to
what would those sanctions or those institutional sanctions you're referring to have to do with a young man being responsible for his child? What would it have to do with that? He made a conscious decision to come out here and meet this young lady, to wine and dine this young lady, to end up probably bedding this young lady, impregnating this young lady, now having a child by this young lady, but yet he refused to come back. Now, I ain't talking about all of them. I'm not generalizing everybody, but I'm talking about statistically speaking. The stats say right now those who have children out of wedlock are more likely to drop out of school, more likely to be parents, more likely to engage in crime. I say those who are out of wedlock now.
But you're seeing the symptom. You're seeing the symptom of a long-standing set of conditions that have existed in the community that are a function of both community changes that relate to your moral opinions about marriage, as well as structural changes that have disproportionately impact the community in very negative ways.
So what do we do about it?
Well,
do we still talk about what was, or do we step up?
Well,
and be responsible
it means that we've got to focus on this problem from my perspective at two levels. We've got the personal responsibility, that is that men and women need to be making choices as it relates to childbearing in responsible ways.
Absolutely.
Secondly, if you can't support a child, a man should not have a child.
Absolutely.
Thirdly, when you engage in the Procreation Act, you should base that on the belief that you want to partner with this individual in a way that's going to create a better outcome for yourself and that child.
I agree.
So
I agree.
So that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that we shouldn't superimpose a level of difficulty within folks within the African American community, for example, such that they can't derive the benefits of the marriage state. That is, have good jobs, be able to live in good communities, strong communities, to be able to send their kids to safe and productive schools. And so, on the one hand, we can't expect we should expect a set of behaviors on one hand from people's commitment to the institution, but on the other hand, we should also expect some structural changes that's going to make the lives of individuals better and not worse off.
Question.
Yes.
Where do we start? I'm saying, I must confess that the majority of the individuals with whom I come into contact really don't view their or they express a position that there's nothing wrong with what they do and the way they do it, and that they find. I mean, I'm saying there ain't nothing wrong with their value system. That there's no diminution of their being. Yeah, I got 3 children, 4 children, whatever. No, I can't take care of them. I do what I can when I can, and that's the way it is. And ain't nothing wrong with me. What you mean?
Well,
my values, ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm fine, right. And I'm cool. But then the next minute, they may lament the fact that I can't buy my child a popsicle, therefore I ain't going over there.
Right.
Because he may want a popsicle.
Exactly,
so I ain't going to go by there
right.
on Father's Day or his birthday or whatever. Why don't we take a little commercial? Okay. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Golden's Tropical World. Come to Golden's Tropical World for tropical fish of all sizes, colors, and types, and other small animals like iguanas and birds from all over the world. There are beautiful tanks, pet supply needs, including dog and cat foods, and expert consultation. Check out Golden's Tropical World, 8611 South Ashland Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Call ahead, 773-239-8809. Your pet shop.
Every now and then I get that feeling, and I've got something I want to say.
One of the great things about being a vegan is that the uniqueness of it.
And I've got to say my way.
So gathered with me today are just a sampling of those vegans who have become loyal supporters of Soul Vegetarian.
Welcome to Soul Vegetarian Restaurant.
International Detective and Protective Services, 1-773-236-8499. Over 20 years of armed security experience. The very best in shopping mall security, inventory watch, find missing loved ones, investigative open legal cases, community policing. Are you taking a vacation this summer? For peace of mind, you need our house watch service, cheetah surveillance, and much more. International Detective and Protective Services. 1-773-236-8499. That's 1-773-236-8499. Call now.
We're trying to
Golden's
look
Tropical
seriously
World.
at this whole question of the influence and impact of fatherhood.
Yes, sir.
There are those who believe that it's hard to be what you don't see.
Watch out. That's right.
Meaning that if, although a lot of these things I agree to some degree, but I think that individuals have within themselves the capacity to become whatever they decide and to act and respond. Like, I know kids who are individuals who've grown up with parents who wouldn't be called desirable parents, but these individuals are just wonderful people. I know other individuals whose parents practically did everything that they could do to try and help shape and mold them in certain directions. And you just wouldn't believe. I mean that these were their parents. I mean, values you talk about, they make sure, seemingly, that they operate on a different set of values than what their parents projected. That they just weren't going to behave that way. I mean, both of you have had some experiences with child rearing. And honest to goodness, I know children who've come out of the worst environments that you could possibly have and are some of the most wonderful, most desirable people I've ever met. What's the difference?
You said it earlier, Congressman. Young folks can't be what they can't see. So I submit to you that those individuals who may have come out of dysfunctional families may have found a mentor or someone that was in their life, someone to help guide them in their life. And I submit also that if it is to be, it begins with me. You got to have a desire. You're going to change something in order to get something. You can't just go out there willy-nilly and try to think life is just going to bless you with all the things you want. Right. You got to make some choices. You got to make some decisions. Absolutely. And you got to literally you got to change some values. You got to change some discipline. You got to knuckle down. Right. You got to knuckle down and do what you got to do in order to be successful in this world. Right. You just got to do it.
What causes the you? I'm saying I see people come out of the same families. One person is one way. Another person is just the opposite.
And I think sometimes you can't determine. Sometimes it's not, nature or nurture. There's always the question of nature and nurture in the development of individuals, right? And sometimes the nature precedes the nurture. So you can, if a person has a certain makeup, your nurturing may not drive them to where you want them to be. But let me just say, but that doesn't predispose them to end up being bad, right? I was raised without my father. I didn't know my father until I actually graduated college. And one of the things that I think is really important is that I had other individuals in my life. I had a strong mother. I had a strong community. I had a really powerful grandfather. So I think these had significant influences. But
you had a surrogate father.
So in some ways I did, although I didn't see him often, I saw him as a surrogate father.
Absolutely.
Right? But I think, and this is why I think this work is so important, because we do have to put the stake in the ground for fatherhood, because essentially children shouldn't have to try that hard or have to work that hard to derive the benefits of a man in their life, and a father in their life. And so I think if we look at child development, and there's a lot of research that suggests that fathers do certain things for children that mothers don't do, in terms of assertiveness and self-regulation, in terms of self-assuredness, in terms of kind of
disciplining, guidance.
Discipline and guidance in terms of coordination. There's a number of developmental contributions, nurturing which men contribute, which is unique in some ways to what women contribute to the development of children. And it's the bringing together of those assets, right? The things that mothers bring, the things that fathers bring that turn out strong kids.
So when did we change? There was a time when it seemed as though, say, two people were married,
Mm-hmm.
and they were having difficulty, being married.
Mm-hmm.
But they would not divorce, and they'd say, for the sake of the children, we are going to remain. Then the theory kind of, and the practice, entered the picture,
Right.
saying, it's hard to do what you need to do for the children if we're unhappy with each other. So let's go ahead and split up, and we'll do the best we can for and with the children. And so there had to be a time, I think, when this changed. I'm saying there was a time when more people would have stayed together.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And said it was for the sake of the children.
Absolutely.
Now fewer people do that, and they say, well, I go my way, you go your way, and we still do what we can.
Well, I think we got to be careful. I mean, I think you have a point, Congressman, that fathers and mothers making commitments, long-term commitments, even if they're unhappy, to create the outcomes for their kids. But if their unhappiness doesn't generate a supportive, comfortable, and nurturing environment in the home, I could argue that would be just as damaging as the parents being. In fact, it might be better that they're apart.
Well,
if they're arguing and they're in conflict on a regular basis.
Yeah,
okay?
but what's the core for the conflict? What's the reason for the conflict? Because
there's any number of reasons.
It could be any number of reasons. But now we're not talking about you, and we're not talking about her. We're talking about the child now.
Right.
We're talking about rearing children in a wholesome environment.
Exactly.
So it ain't about you now. It ain't about her.
Right.
Even if you don't get along. What about the child? So we're talking, hold on 1 second. Okay. We're talking about now doing it for the child. Now, Congressman alluded to the fact that back in certain days and certain values, the value was we're going to stick it out for the benefit of our children. And to this day, those mentalities and values are still sticking it out. And it ain't always been good, but it's been worth it for the sake of the child.
Right.
Now we're living in a situation, in a society where it's okay to say, look, I'm done. Listen, you just don't please me. No, I mean, we have denigrated so much mentally. To if it's not physically, if we're not making the same amount of money, this relationship don't work. If you don't see what I see in my eye, we don't see eye to eye on this issue, I'm ready to go. It's so easy now for folks to say, let's go, than it is to stick it out.
Well, let me say, as an individual who's been married 30 years, right, August 7th, I got to tell you that I know marriages work. And the commitment to that process, if you're engaging, I would argue, if you're engaging in the rearing of children, you should have a commitment to that work. If you don't have a commitment to that work, I would argue that's somewhat problematic. That if you can feel like you can dispense with it because there's a little argument or there's a conflict or you don't see eye to eye on a particular event, I don't think that's appropriate. But
they do.
But they do, and I would say that's problematic.
Yeah.
I would say that's problematic. But I would also suggest that we have to be mindful that there are situations in which parents may need to separate in order to be effective and functional for their children. And so under those circumstances that I would argue that it's particularly important for men, because what the research also suggests is once men physically separate from their kids, there's a likelihood that they're going to get an emotional separation from their kids as well. Mm-hmm. So for men, it really becomes really important that they be conscientious in their commitment to staying emotionally and physically and nurturing ways committed to their kids if they decide to make that choice, notwithstanding the nature of the relationship with the mother of their children.
But now when they make that separation, and that separation is distant, as you alluded to, then what happens is, particularly to young ladies, they end up looking for that person. They're looking for that male father, that male image. They're looking for that father. So they seek out these busters, all right? They seek out these guys who say the little things to them that they be liking. Girl, you know you this, you know you that, and give them a happy meal here or this or that, or whatever they do, get their nails done and ride in the car. So they're looking for a male figure to call, that they can hold on to, that they can believe in. In essence, they're looking for that father figure. So they crave into these guys because they appear to be men, but they're actually little boys. And then what ends up happening, they end up getting caught up in a relationship with this guy where all he wanted to do was conquer, you know? He was a predator, all right?
Well,
yeah, I think especially, I mean, when you reach the age of teenhood and all of these conflicting feelings and emotions and all those things set in. I used to teach adolescent psychology and then trying to understand adolescence.
That's a challenge.
It's a big challenge.
Someone with two teenage girls.
I mean, got it.
But we also suggest that the traditional family is important.
Absolutely.
If, we talk about equal opportunity,
yes,
and
sir.
we talk about a desire to be equal,
yes,
to
sir.
have equal protection under the law,
right.
equal everything. I mean, if these patterns of behavior don't change somewhat, I think the question of equality is out of the question.
Right. Well,
I'm saying
both need to
I don't know how you can be
right. Both need to happen, and I think
equal.
And I think we need to support. We need to support men. Men need to be need to assert their responsibility for their children and their community and their families. No question. And I think part of what we're trying to do with fathers, families, and healthy communities is suggest that if we can position men as assets where they can be employed, where they can have the educational standing that they need, where they can manage their relationships with the mother of their children, where they understand child development issues and know how to engage their children appropriately, that these are all things that contribute to their asset, which create better outcomes for children. So I think I'm not making any argument about men standing up and taking their responsibility, because that's the entry point for the work that needs to get done. If that doesn't get done, we can't do anything else.
And that's me, Congressman, and I like what you said earlier, and thank you for saying it. Particularly young men. Young men can't be what they can't see, and they gonna be what they see. And so we at Fathers Who Care, we believe that we have to mirror, we have to mentor, we have to be that image of young men. For the young men. Young men need to see positive men out here going to work every day, standing up, being advocates for other fathers, standing up against violence, standing up for the right to choose, but also the right to protect. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're standing up. We're making a difference at Fathers Who Care, that we know that if it's going to be, it begins with us. We have to come on out there and be responsible for what's going on in our community. Absolutely. We're not doing it for no money. Right. We're not doing it for no glory. We're doing it because it is our mission, it is our call, and we will make a difference, and we have to make a difference. We have to protect these young ladies in our community. Right. We have to respect them so much that when they see men on the street, they're not intimidated by the men or think that the men are going to be disrespectful to them, but they look at these men and say, well, these are real men, because these are men that are making a difference in our community. And if real men stand up, little boy is going to sit down. Right. I believe it. I believe it in my heart. If we want to curb violence in our neighborhood, let the men in the community come on out them houses,
I think
take
right.
their rightful places on the corners and take over their community. And I guarantee them young fellas will lead a corner.
I agree with you.
But how do we convince enough men that part of their responsibility is to be seriously engaged in what I call the socialization processes? I'm saying I go to a lot of places where men act like they feel out of place if they are there. I'm saying here's a discussion going on at the local school council. And, you know, there are either 10, 12, 15 women there. And, you know, 1 or 2 fellas are there. Even I used to do block club organizing, a lot of. If I went to a block club meeting and there were 15 people there, 12 of them would be women, 3 would be men, and generally would be the man whose house it was at, and 2 of his buddies that he had
The precinct captains.
convinced to come. But the action was basically being
Driven by the women.
carried
Yeah.
by the women.
Yeah.
And so the next meeting, Mr. Jones ain't gonna be there. He went cause his buddy goes, come on, man, and be here.
Yeah.
And I used to go to meetings, and the men would actually, in many instances, go down in the basement and have some coffee, maybe even a little shot of spirit, while the women had the real part of the meeting. And then after the meeting, you know, the business of the meeting ended, then the men might come up and they all join for a while.
Well, why do you think that, Congressman?
I really don't know. I'm searching because when I was a child, of course, that's been a long time ago, the men in the little community where I lived felt that it was manly to deal with the problems, the needs, the hopes and aspirations of the community. That was the manly thing to do.
Right.
As a matter of fact, my mother used to threaten us sometime with, she said, she'd be talking about her brother. She says, I'm going to have to get a dude to come over here and really chastise you all. Well, it wasn't that my father was not a good chastiser. We used to try to, well, we used to try to wonder what she's talking about because, you know, my father was a pretty tough guy himself. I mean, he was serious. And so we figured, of course, she never did it, but we figured Uncle Dude must have been a bad cat.
Absolutely.
I mean, but I think some of it had to do with her respect for him as her older brother.
Okay.
And he was kind of like the leader in the community, kind of, the black. As a matter of fact, we named the post office after him in Parkdale, Arkansas. It's the Willie Vaughn's post office, the congressman down there. I mean, so he was a community leader. I mean, and so we never could figure out what the deal was, but men had a little sense of pride in terms of deciding and doing things. It appears that many men don't have a need in communities to be that engaged. That the pride factor seemed to be gone in many instances. And they grow up, I guess, without it. And even after they get older, they don't seem to have it.
And Congressman, I see you working tirelessly. You know, I'm impressed. You know, I mean, I see you always going. So I look upon you. My father passed when I was young, 16 years old. I look at you as a father figure, and I see how you commit yourself to the lives of empowering others. Right. That motivates me. So I'm committed. Now mind you, I could have and have and have had my days, all right? But inside of me, I knew I had to make a difference. I knew I had to be instrumental in some lives of some other folks, so some other folks would make some of the mistakes I made. Right. Yeah, it is. It does have a lot to do with pride. How do you feel about yourself, and how do you feel about your community? How do you feel about these young ladies that you're supposed to be kind of like the arrow of? You're supposed to be guarding them, protecting them, but you're not even responsible. So I like the way you stand and allowing us to stand on your shoulders.
Well, and I think I agree with that 100%. I think primarily the models have to be there for men to appreciate, and that men have to kind of recognize that part of their role as being men and then being father is taking leadership roles in their communities.
Absolutely.
And I think there has been somewhat of an abdication of that, and I don't know if that's a function of the challenges that we experience in our communities, or if it's kind of a change in culture within our communities. But I think that men need to reassert when I say reassert, I don't mean in a kind of an aggressive way, but I mean in terms of having a value about protection and security and the promotion of strong communities and safe children. Right?
You say, how can we get this? How can we get men back involved? Do what you've been doing, Congressman. Keep on bringing men together.
Exactly.
It don't change overnight. It didn't happen overnight. But keep doing what you're doing, allowing Kirk and myself to continue to facilitate these forums and empowerment groups where men can come together and men can have a chance to talk to each other and mentor each other and learn from each other. Just continue to do what you're doing, laying the foundation, pouring into us so that we can be what we need to be in order to empower others to be what they need to be. I say continue to do what you're doing. It don't happen overnight, but it will happen.
Right.
Well, I there are just so many ways, I think. And, well, let's take another little break here and see if our sponsors have something to say. And we'll be right back and close out.
Golden's Tropical World. Come to Golden's Tropical World for tropical fish of all sizes, colors, and types, and other small animals like iguanas and birds from all over the world. There are beautiful tanks, pet supply needs, including dog and cat foods, and expert consultation. Check out Golden's Tropical World, 8611 South Ashland Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Call ahead, 773-239-8809. Your Pet Shop.
Every now and then I get that feeling, and I've got something I want to say.
One of the great things about being a vegan is that the uniqueness of it.
And I've got to say my way.
So gathered with me today are just a sampling of those vegans who have become loyal supporters of Soul Vegetarian.
Welcome to Soul Vegetarian Restaurant.
International Detective and Protective Services, 1-773-236-8499. Over 20 years of armed security experience. The very best in shopping mall security, inventory watch, find missing loved ones, investigative open legal cases, community policing. Are you taking a vacation this summer? For peace of mind, you need our House Watch service, cheetah surveillance, and much more. International Detective and Protective Services. 1-773-236-8499. That's 1-773-236-8499. Call now.
We are still talking about men. I remember the blues singer had a song. It says, everybody running around talking about you was a man, and asking yourselves, what does a woman want? He said, well, I can tell you that what women want is they want a man to love them and love them with joy. They don't want no man acting like a mannish boy. And so the concept of manly deeds, I remember in my fraternity, we talk about manly deeds and scholarship. Well, you know, in many communities, if you express scholarship, people take the position that there's something wrong with you, that you are an egghead, you are something. But I think we've done a lot of that down through certain levels of history where people who were kind of intellectual were kind of described as something's kind of wrong with them. They're not the norm. And where much of the glorification came into the brawn as opposed to the brain. And I'm not sure that we've diminished a whole lot of that.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I can give myself as a prime example. So when I was in high school, I was 6'1", 225 pounds. So everybody presumed I was a superb athlete. I was not. I was smart, but I was not a good athlete. If my father was there to tell me that was okay, then I wouldn't have had all that angst about the fact that I was smart and I wasn't a good athlete. And I think that's the point, Congressman, that these messages that we get in our society, sometimes those are messages that only men, for example, can deliver to boys, and can deliver to them effectively. That you don't have to be, in order to be a man, you don't have to be a great basketball player. You can just be a smart lawyer or a smart doctor.
But I also submit that, Congressman was on the commercial, was talking about different situations and scenarios, and how do we get more men involved. I submit that men want to be involved, but men just have a certain psychic about themselves, unlike women. We just don't like being played with. We don't like being toyed with. We don't like repetitious things that ain't producing. We like to be involved in things that's producing, because that's the nature of a man, to conquer. I mean, we're predators. We're about nature. We're going to conquer. We got to move. We got to keep it moving. Got to keep it moving. Those who are positive. I'm talking about positive, not negative. So I submit that if we continue to do what we're doing, continue, however many groups we got, it's all good. The more the merrier. Just don't compete and fight against each other for the little stuff. But if we're continuously empowering the men, letting the men know that it's okay for men to bond with other men. Absolutely. It's okay for men to disagree with each other. It's okay to have difference of opinion. It's okay to have some moment.
And I think we got to create purposeful spaces for men in all of our community institutions. And
to do that.
To do that.
Yeah.
And make it a regular practice. And I was just going to say, part of it too, I think, Congressman, I think one of the challenges that we're having is for our young boys, there's no more rites of passage. Like, how do boys transition into manhood? In many of our communities, they do it on the street, which is not how it should be happening. And so we got to figure out a better way to create that nexus from their adolescent years to their manhood years.
Well, see, I marvel at people who were around where I grew up and when I grew up without a lot of formal training. For us, the year 12 kind of became the time when you were expected to venture into another level of being. But now this was taken from the concept that Jesus was 12 years old. Not that Jesus was 12 years old when he slipped in the temple and was in there, answering questions, and he actually, didn't go home with his parents. They get halfway down the road or halfway to where they was going, so they noticed, hey, where's that boy? Jesus ain't with him. So 12, and so my community, the people who, I used to wonder how they knew all of these things, and they just took a lot of things because there was not a single African American in my town who had a college degree until I guess I was about 14 or 15 years old, when two people in the town finally, actually I graduated from college with two of my elementary school teachers because they didn't have to have degrees to teach. And they had all kinds of programs, where you go to school, split session, and when school was out, then they'd be involved in a continuing education. But they knew a lot of things, and they did a lot of things, and they had children do those things. I mean, they taught children concepts and values at Sunday school, which was something that they owned. And so you'd learn certain kinds of things. You'd talk about respecting girls or whatever. You learn to value women. I mean, you open the door. You pick up the handkerchief that the girls would deliberately drop so you could pick it up. I mean, you were taught all these little things, and they became a part of you. And once they became a part of you, I take pride, I take delight in saying yes, sir, to a person as a symbol of respect. I mean, and it does not diminish me to say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, to some person who's even a child. And oftentimes I do. Thank you, sir. Whatever. It seems to me that the whole question of value, I think in some instances we did what I call, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. And I think some of it happened as we attempted to take off the shackles of oppression, the shackles of slavery and the aftermath and all of that, and self-assertion caused us to kind of discard some of those things that were just valuable in terms of a certain level of human decency and respect and things that you learned, and somehow or another, hopefully we'll get back to some of that. So, gentlemen, let me thank you for a very stimulating discussion. I still think that we have many, many more that we need to engage in. And I do think that there are many places where men can step up and be more engaged in the affairs of their communities than what we are experiencing. So thank you for viewing. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you next week.